In the heart of England, nestled among rolling green hills and misty woodlands, stood the Windermere Wildlife Reserve, a sanctuary devoted to the preservation of endangered species. Among its sprawling habitats and quiet forest trails lived a girl named Clara Whitmore, the only daughter of Dr. Leonard Whitmore, a visionary conservationist who had dedicated his life to protecting great apes. Clara's childhood was anything but ordinary. While most children played with dolls or video games, her companions were creatures that others only saw on screens: gorillas, orangutans, and chimpanzees. Her earliest memories were filled with the scent of the forest, the rhythmic calls of wildlife, and the deep, resonant grunts of gorillas echoing through the sanctuary's valley. From the moment she could walk, her father had encouraged her to build connections with the animals. He believed that true conservation began not in laboratories or offices, but in relationships, that empathy was the most powerful bridge between species. Among the many animals that surrounded her, two gorillas became her closest friends, Haru and Balin, both western lowland gorillas rescued as infants. Haru was calm and protective, with wise amber eyes that always watched over her. Balin, in contrast, was playful and mischievous, a giant bundle of energy that loved to tumble through the grass with her until both were covered in leaves. The bond between them was extraordinary. When Clara learned to walk, Haru would sometimes stretch out one massive arm to steady her whenever she tripped over a tree root. Balin followed close behind, eager to play, his soft grunts filling the air like laughter. They shared everything: apples, bananas, and moments of pure innocence. Clara would sit cross-legged on the grass, passing pieces of fruit to the gorillas, and they would take them gently from her tiny hands. Watching them together, one could forget where the human ended and the animal began. Their trust was complete. Dr. Whitmore observed each moment carefully, documenting every interaction with his camera and notebook. His dream was to prove to the world that peaceful coexistence between humans and wildlife wasn't just possible. It was necessary. That on Clara's 7th birthday, he gave her a gift that would define her forever: a silver necklace with a tiny gorilla pendant. "This," he told her, fastening it around her neck, "is not just a charm. It's a promise to protect them always." She wore it every day after that. For years, Clara's life revolved around her gorilla family. Every morning she ran through the reserve's paths, calling out for Haru and Balin. They always answered, a soft grunt from behind a bush, or the crash of branches announcing their arrival. But even paradise has its limits. As she grew older, Clara began to understand the larger purpose of the reserve and the work her father was doing. The gorillas were not meant to live their lives behind fences or within the comfort of human company. They were being prepared to return to the wild, to reclaim their place in the forests of Central Africa, where their species was disappearing fast. When Dr. Whitmore first mentioned this to her, Clara didn't want to believe him. "They belong here," she said, her voice breaking. "They belong out there," her father replied gently. "That's the dream, Clara, freedom." Years passed, and the inevitable day drew near. The gorillas had matured into strong, independent adults, fully capable of surviving on their own. At 11 years old, Clara faced the hardest day of her young life. The staff and biologists of the reserve gathered near the transport trucks. Large wooden crates lined the loading area, filled with leaves and fruit to comfort the animals during their journey. Haru and Balin were calm, almost as if they understood what was happening. Clara stood nearby, clutching her pendant. Her father knelt beside her and tried to reassure her, but she could barely hear him. When the trucks began to roll away, she ran alongside them, calling out their names until they disappeared into the distance. That evening, the sanctuary felt unbearably silent. For the first time in years, there were no deep grunts echoing through the valley. Only the wind moved through the trees, carrying away her childhood. The years that followed transformed Clara. The pain of losing her gorilla companions became fuel for determination. She studied tirelessly, following in her father's footsteps. She earned degrees in conservation biology and environmental science, specializing in the rehabilitation of great apes. Though her work took her to various sanctuaries across Europe and Africa, a part of her heart remained in Windermere, and with the two gorillas who had shaped her life, she often wondered if they remembered her. She imagined them somewhere in a vast forest, surrounded by their own kind, strong and free. She hoped the years had been kind to them at T23. She decided it was time to find out. After years of preparation and planning, Clara organized an expedition to Ngala Forest Reserve, the protected region in Central Africa where Haru and Balin had been reintroduced. Her goal was to document their adaptation to the wild, and perhaps, if fate allowed, to see them once more. She traveled with a team of biologists, conservation filmmakers, and local trackers. The journey was arduous. Long drives on muddy trails, nights under canvas tents, and the heavy air of tropical forests filled with insects and mystery. But Clara's heart was alive again, driven by purpose and hope. Days passed before they reached the area where tracking devices had last detected the gorillas. The forest was dense, a green cathedral alive with sound. Clara's boots sank into the soft earth as she followed her guides deeper into the wilderness. Each snapped twig made her heart race. Every distant call made her pause, hoping it was them. Then, one humid afternoon, something stirred in the undergrowth ahead. The group froze. Cameras were raised. A low grunt echoed through the trees. Deep, familiar, powerful. Clara's pulse quickened. From behind a curtain of ferns, a massive figure stepped into view. He was larger now, with silver hairs streaking across his back and chest, the mark of a dominant male. His eyes were dark, intelligent, steady. There was no doubt. It was Balin. The years melted away in an instant. Clara took a cautious step forward. "Balin," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's me." He didn't move. He tilted his head, watching her carefully. The forest held its breath. She kept her hands at her sides, speaking softly, using the same tone she had as a child. "It's me, your friend. Do you remember?" For a long, suspended moment, there was silence. Then, Balin grunted, low, questioning. His eyes softened. Slowly, he moved closer until only a few feet separated them. But Clara's eyes filled with tears. She didn't dare move until he did. Finally, Balin reached out his enormous hand. The gesture was hesitant, uncertain, yet filled with recognition. Clara extended her arm, letting her fingertips brush his knuckles. The connection was electric, a bridge of memory spanning more than a decade. And then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, the great gorilla leaned forward and drew her into a careful embrace that was brief but powerful, filled with a weight of unspoken understanding, proof that love and memory transcend the limits of language or time. For the rest of that day, Clara remained with Balin and his troop, watching them interact. He was no longer the playful youngster she had grown up with. Now he was a leader, guiding his group with quiet authority. She observed how he shared food, settled disputes, and comforted the younger ones. Every so often, he would glance toward her, as if making sure she was still there. The connection between them was undeniable, not that of a zookeeper and an animal, but of two beings who had once shared a childhood. That night, as the sun dipped below the canopy, painting the forest in hues of gold and green, Clara knew it was time to go. Her team had gathered their footage, and she had found what she came for. She approached Balin one last time. He sat beneath a tree, his chest rising and falling in slow, powerful rhythm. She knelt in front of him. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. He looked at her, eyes calm and steady, and for a moment she could almost feel that he understood. Then, with a quiet grunt, he touched her shoulder gently, a farewell, an acknowledgement, and turned to walk back into the forest. She watched until the last glimmer of his dark silhouette disappeared among the trees. Tears streamed down her face. But they were no longer tears of sadness. They were gratitude for what had been, for what still existed, and for what her father had taught her to believe in. When Clara returned to England, she brought back more than research data and camera footage. She carried a renewed sense of purpose. The reunion had changed her. It had shown her that her father's dream, peaceful coexistence between humans and nature, wasn't just a theory. It was real. She spent the following years traveling, lecturing, and advocating for conservation projects across the world. Her story spread quickly. The girl who grew up with gorillas and found them again years later. Children listened to her talks with wide eyes. Adults left inspired. Donations poured into the Whitmore Foundation, now stronger than ever. One evening, after a long conference, Clara walked through the quiet sanctuary her father had once built. The enclosures stood empty, the gorillas of her youth now free, living their lives as nature intended. She stopped by the old observation deck, where she had first learned to feed Haru and Balin. On the railing lay the carved initials her father had once etched there, CW and LW, a simple reminder of the bond that had shaped her life. Clara touched the pendant at her neck, still the same silver gorilla, slightly worn but gleaming faintly in the moonlight. "Thank you," she whispered, to her father, to Haru, to Balin, and to every creature that had taught her what it meant to love without boundaries. Years later, when journalists asked her what that reunion had meant, Clara always answered the same way. "It reminded me that love doesn't disappear when distance or time separates us. True connection, whether between humans or animals, lives on, waiting quietly to be recognized again." The documentary of her journey, Bridges Between Worlds, premiered the following year and touched millions. Viewers wept as they watched the young woman reunite with the gorilla who had once helped her learn to walk. The film ended with a simple line spoken by Clara herself. "If one child watches this and learns to protect rather than harm, then my father's dream continues." And somewhere, deep in the forests of Africa, a great silver-backed gorilla sat beneath a tree, watching over his troop, strong, wise, and free, unaware that far away, a human heart still beat in rhythm with his own.